Hi, Rajive. Welcome to Venture with Grace today.
Hi, Grace. How are you?
I'm good. Again, I'm very jealous of your Swatch in the background. I'm not a Swatch fan. I feel like I don't really know. I've never seen people in America wear Swatch, but I feel like I've been wearing Swatch since I was I don't know, elementary school or something.
I like the ones that are life size.
Exactly. That's the one that I need. So I've listened to some of your past interviews. I want to start with maybe your journey with AT&T. I think that's how your career got started, and tell us more how you got into venture and how also you co-founded a company. We'll get to that later on. So why don't we
Yeah.
start with
Well,
you telling the story instead of
I'll
me
tell you. I'll
butchering
tell you the
it?
story. No problem. So I graduated from a small business school in Boston, or in Waltham, outside of Boston, called Bentley College, which is now Bentley University. And my first job was working for a Bentley alum at AT&T, doing corporate development and corporate strategy. I was born and raised in Dubai, and so Dallas, Texas was a very interesting place to live and work, and an absolutely amazing experience. AT&T's corporate development, corporate strategy team was kind of run like an investment bank. So the rest of the organization would kind of leave at like around 5, 6, and then we would have our second what we would joke as our second shift in the evening. But that got me really interested in the world of strategy and M&A. So we did a lot of M&A on some interesting stuff like T-Mobile, and some not interesting stuff like towers in Arkansas, for example, and kind of everything in between. So it got me great exposure to all of the fun parts of M&A, like the actual transaction, and then the not so fun parts, like dealing with regulation and regulators. And then from a strategy standpoint, really got honed in on, what do you do after you've bought something, and how do you really build value into it? And then in many cases, if it's not working, how do you kind of spin that thing out? How do you find buyers? All of those skills that are in many ways immediately transferable to what I do today. So I did that for 6 years. Got a little tired of just seeing the the telecom sector. I wanted to see the rest of the TMT, so the other T and the other M. And so at the time we were working with Bain and Company, and one of the Bain partners uh, had did a lot of work in TMT, and so I said, "Hey, I want to work on your team. How do I do that?" And he said, "Hey, I'm never going to hire you off of a client. So go get an MBA." And I said, "Okay, where should I go?" He said, "I went to Cornell. It was great. I'll write you a letter." So he did that. I went to Cornell, 2 years in Ithaca, also a super fascinating experience, and then moved to the Parthenon Group, which eventually became Parthenon EY, to do strategy consulting, and was really focused on TMT and private equity venture capital consulting at the time, and then moved to lead the technology sector for Booz Company, which eventually became Strategy and PwC, to do the exact same thing out of New York. And in the middle of all of that, my wife and I founded a business that we started in 2011 and sold in 2018. It was a pet services business. We still own it now, just in Dubai, not in North America anymore. And so we sold it in 2018, and then kind of had a bunch of free time, and a little bit of money. And so we said, look, what do we want to do? We'd never lived in Asia, either of us, and so we decided, let's try Southeast Asia. And here we are in Singapore, in sunny Singapore, as you can kind of tell from some of my background. We've been here 4 years, and I've been with Cathay doing venture for over 3 years now, coming on my fourth, made partner last year. And it's been such a wild ride. I've seen the highs of 2020 and 2021 when things were just going nuts. I've seen the very, very lows of 22 and 23 with a lot of companies around us going bust or getting down rounds and valued appropriately and kind of everything in between. So happy to speak about all of that, but that's in a nutshell a little bit about the journey.
Mm. I wonder, I have like so many questions about like, first of all, like I wanted to ask about like the um traveling. So you have worked, so you have like lived in Dubai, then some cities in the US and then now Singapore. I guess like from like an investing perspective, I guess what do you see as like the differences between like each ecosystem? I've also lived in China and now I live in Silicon Valley. So I feel like there were like some drastic differences between the ecosystem. I wonder what's your thought on that. And I've never been to Dubai. Obviously, that's where many of the LPs are from. So or Singapore. Tell us more about like the ecosystem there, about like maybe the mindset of like people investing in different vehicles between like, venture to real estate to anything else.
Yeah, no, for sure. Between my work experience and Cathay, I've been able to build a really robust network globally. So I'm super well versed with the European venture ecosystem thanks to Cathay, and have a decent, although I would still think a little bit of a superficial knowledge of the Chinese ecosystem. And then I'm in Southeast Asia, and so between Southeast Asia and India, I have a really good handle on this one. And then I spent a lot of my formative career in the US, and so I have a good network there. I would say the buyer is very different, or the client is very different in all markets, and it's really just a factor of maturity, and it's a factor of talent within those markets. So I find Silicon Valley talent to be in abundance and the buyer to be very mature. It's a 50, 60-year-old venture market, and it shows. Folks are kind of used to seeing what scales and what doesn't, are willing to experiment, are willing to give second chances. And those are some of the things that make the American venture ecosystem amazing. They're highly professional. They're very incredibly direct and kind of straight to the point. In many ways, where Asia is not. Southeast Asian and Indian VCs have a harder time saying no. It's easier just to not say anything. And it's, I wouldn't say right or wrong. It's just cultural. Second chances are harder to come by here, but that's also because capital has not been as much in abundance here as it is in other parts of the world. Um, and then when you compare Dubai, I mean, yeah, Dubai gets a little bit of a rep around the all of the LPs coming from there, but I think it's a little bit more foresighted than that. They're building one of the largest crypto hubs in the world, and have done that by really being very thoughtful about regulation. They're attracting talent in alternative sectors, to try and drive innovation within the economy. So I think they're doing their part, but it's the newest kid on the block, as far as ecosystems or major ecosystems are concerned. So it'll take 5-10 years before you see really the fruits of a lot of this labor. In the same way, you sort of see that in Southeast Asia. I mean, in earnest, the Southeast Asian ecosystem started in 2012, and here we are in 2024, 12 years later, and we only have a handful of IPOs and exits to speak of. That will change in the next decade. But for the moment, it's still a very young ecosystem that hasn't really been tested until just recently. And so all markets kind of need to go through that test. Some will be more resilient than others, but I think that's sort of a good litmus test for scale and maturity of an ecosystem.
Mm, I feel like I wonder, so I have some questions there, but like before we dive deeper into the ecosystem, why don't we give the audience a little bit of background of Cathay Innovation?
Yeah,
Um yeah.
happy to. So we're a $6 billion
By the way,
global.
I met some of your colleagues in my event in
Oh,
Atlanta.
cool,
Yeah.
cool,
But anyway,
cool, cool. We're a $6 billion global investment firm, headquartered out of predominantly Paris, but we're a global firm. Half of that roughly is in private equity, half of that is in venture. We invest out of a few funds in venture, so our dedicated growth funds. So the most recent one will end up being around €1 billion. And then we have some smaller vehicles like a fintech, insurtech vehicle, a dedicated Web3 vehicle, so on and so forth. We invest globally, which means we have offices in almost every location from San Francisco to Singapore and everything in between. We're heavy Europe focused, but we have an amazing team in North America and teams in China, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and then partner funds in Africa as well. And so the idea here is that we kind of see things globally. Trends don't necessarily happen unilaterally. They'll typically happen in one market first and then trickle into other markets. But being able to see that, see what happened, and learn from that, and then invest in another market appropriately is where we are at our best. Um, we are backed by a number of amazing LPs, but ones that I'd like to highlight are the ones that are corporate in nature. So the likes of Sanofi, Valeo, Total, Michelin, BNP Paribas, and BNP Paribas Cardiff. And what that does is it allows us to really get the best of the industry, the end market industries, into our deal making process. And so at every step of the way, we are really in lockstep in terms of what's really going to happen in the digital health care sector, what's going to move the needle, and how can Sanofi help either with diligence or be a distributor at the back end. So things like that make us quite a unique value proposition globally to have in your cap table, but really to be effective as a venture partner on your team.
I guess I wanted to touch upon a little bit on like the LP side. So I know that you also mentioned in the other podcast that like LP also helps with like sourcing deal as well. Like not necessarily they tell you this is a company we look at, but more of like here are like some trends of like, here are something that we need in our ecosystem as like a tech perspective, or they can help basically giving some insights in their different like sectors. And I wonder, um does this like is this like similar to like a corp dev function, as like eventually the goal is for the LP to own a piece of the company, or like is this more like only financial driven? And I guess like how closely do you work with the LPs? Like is that like on a daily basis, or would it be more of like once in a year, like in the AGM, you say hi to them or something?
Got it. There's a lot to unpack there. I'll try and get to most pieces. Um, it's not an end goal for a company that we invest in to be acquired by an LP, but it's a nice story. But it's not an end goal. I think we are primarily financially driven, and then if there's an opportunity or ways that a startup can collaborate with the LP in a meaningful way, then we're all for it, and we'll do everything that we can to help. And I can give you so many examples where that's the case, where that's happened. Um, in terms of cadence of collaboration, it really depends on the region and it depends on the LP. Not all LPs are in all regions, and not all regions are super active in that specific sector. And so, for example, if I think about insurance or our work with BNP Paribas Cardiff, I would say Southeast Asia, India, and Europe are probably the heaviest collaboration for with that group. Um, Whereas in digital healthcare, it's a completely different equation. And so the level of organization, the level of cadence, how we engage, how we interact, is completely different depending on the team and the theme and the industry and the LP as well. Sometimes an LP has a very strategic, narrow set of priorities for innovation. Sometimes it's super broad. They'll invest in anything because they feel like they could learn something from not necessarily the technology, but from the process of how that technology came to be. And so there's a lot of knowledge sharing and value sharing at every step of the way. And there's a lot of organized sessions to do that. But I think a lot of the fun and a lot of the real knowledge transfer happens in the unorganized sections. And so there's a lot of relationships that we build with our LPs, and we're sharing trading notes on a fairly regular basis. And so that's typically our cadence. Again, there are examples where an LP has taken a major or majority stake in a company, but that's never the goal or the intention. The goal of the intention is that this company that we invest in can be a great company on a standalone basis and can exit and or IPO or whatever on a standalone basis as well.
I wonder when you are, so I guess like how do you um work together with the rest of the team? I know that you guys have invested in Pinduoduo, and like 5 years later you invest in Pinduoduo in Brazil. Not Pinduoduo, but like there's like an equivalent of that in
Yep.
Brazil. So
Yep.
basically you see a trend perform in like a region, then you the global team kind of like hunt it down in their region. I don't know if that's like a special case for you guys, but or like, I guess like number one, how do you collaborate as a team and like globally? Do you guys have like weekly meetings or, sharing trends from each sector, or I guess like how does it work? I
Yeah,
have like a
absolutely.
lot of questions, but I don't want to overwhelm you with like
No,
next
absolutely, absolutely.
questions.
Um, there's a global meeting where we all meet, and we all share ideas. We all share what we're looking at regionally. Um, and then there's individual meetings with our fund manager, who's really the cross pollinator of knowledge, because he sees sort of everything in every region and says, "Oh, you should talk to him, and he's working on this, and she's working on that." Um, but there is a global meeting where we kind of see everything that everyone else is working on, or riffing on and iterating on, and that's sort of a formal setting. The informal setting is obviously there's six partners across the globe, and we speak very regularly, individually. So I speak fairly routinely with our partners in the U.S. As well as our partners in Europe, and then on specific deals with our partners in China as well. And so there's a lot of knowledge that gets shared through that process. The example that you gave of Pinduoduo, which then turned into Fasili, is one. There's so many like that. We looked at back market in Europe a couple of times, just couldn't get there for one reason or the other. And then 2 years passed, and then we saw Rebello in Southeast Asia, which is now in the US, and we jumped on it, doing the exact same thing, right? And so there's the process works as far as the time machine is concerned, but also it's making sure that you have a partnership that is super close, has a cadence and a relationship to really be have worked together for a really long time, and can kind of riff on that and kind of build on each other's strengths and ideas.
I wonder, so, since I've from my like experience working in China, I feel like in Asia, like a lot of the innovation happening are on the business model side instead of like, in the US, I feel like people wanted to build um a core technology, SaaS product, but in Asia, I feel like it's a, you know, super app driven like culture. So like I feel like it's like one app takes it all kind of vibe. So I wonder when you are in terms of like sourcing, um, like picking, winning, and diligence, or like I guess like exiting to a degree. Like how do you see it like differently from your experience in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think your insight is spot on. I think there's some markets, the U.S., Israel, certain parts of India that are really building core tech and differentiated core tech, and then there are other parts of the world, predominantly in Asia, that are really focused on distribution and access and are solving those problems. And I think it's just where we are in our life cycle. The U.S. doesn't have a distribution and an access problem. They can reach all 330 million people if they really wanted to with a core technology. The infrastructure is there that allows them to do that. Whereas if China or if India wanted to reach their respective 1.3 billion people, it would take them a really long time. And that's even at the federal and at the government level, let alone a startup trying to unlock and access even a portion of that population. So I think that's sort of where we are in our maturity curve. We're still solving distribution and access. And so when we think about investing, we think about who else will have this exact horizontal access problem, and if it's applicable in one country, do 5 or 6 other countries have that same access problem? Ultimately, we've moved away from investing in country champions to investing in regional champions, and in some edge cases, global champions, where a problem is so horizontal in nature that it could be easily ported from one country to another, with the same level of efficacy. And so for us, that's kind of how we think about investing. And then obviously, if you are a regional company or a global company, where you choose to exit, how you exit, who the buyer universe is, what public market you choose to exit on, um, becomes a lot easier. And so that's sort of how we think about things now, which has evolved from how we thought about things in the region 3 or 4 years ago when we just started.
I wonder, so when I was working in China, so we had financial advisor as like a one big component of the ecosystem, as like like a deal have to go to, even the top deal go through like a financial advisor, go, and then it comes into like our firm. And I wonder, like, does this apply to, investing in Singapore? And I guess like how do you guys can you walk us through any investments that you've made? We could use like any of your portfolios on your LinkedIn to
Yeah,
as an example of like how you kind of found out about the deal to making like diligencing it to like investing in it.
yeah, absolutely. So rarely do we engage with a financial advisor, or I mean, but again, at an early stage, if a company really can't tell its own story, that's a problem. Unless the company is being built by core technologists who are just really focused on the technology, not as focused on the distribution, can't really tell their story. I could understand that edge case, but for the vast majority at an early stage, if a company can't tell its story, it doesn't give me much confidence that post our investment that all of a sudden that will magically change. So we do a lot of work to learn about companies very early on, irrespective of when we invest. So we will take meetings with seed, Series A, pre-Series A, just to get to learn more about them. We typically will only invest late Series A, early Series B, Series C. So slightly later in the process, but we also won't typically invest on someone we've just met. Um, we typically take a little bit of time to get to know the founder, to get to know the market, to get to know the team, and to see how they go through one iteration of I said I was going to do that, and then I did that, right? And it's typically our process. Um, so we'll take the example of Rebello because I mentioned it earlier. So um, we had looked at back market as a theme, and we wanted to do something in circular, and we wanted to do something in refurbished. Um, there was a few ways we could have done that. We could have done circular as a technology, so someone that's making recycling a lot more efficient for a specific use case. Someone that would impact the bottom of the pyramid, so like the farmers or whatever. Or we could have invested in something like Rebello, which is a marketplace for all refurbished product. At the time, there were two. There was Rebello and there was one other one. The other one did rentals, roughly at the same stage scale, and then there was Rebello, who's a marketplace. I spoke to the team and the partner who had uh, looked at back market a few times, and he had told me all of the things about back market that were great, and then all of the reasons why he passed as well, and maybe regretted it. Um, and so I said, okay, look, that's perfect because all of the things that make back market great are here, but all of the things that they make them not so great are being fixed here. And so this looks like a great opportunity. And then the last thing is Rebello started in Singapore, but then their first market was in Australia and New Zealand, and then South Korea, a little bit of Malaysia, Hong Kong. And so it told us that this founder knows that this is a horizontal problem and knows that if you do this right, you're not building a marketplace for refurbished tech product, but actually you're building the Amazon for all of refurbished products because you could put all categories into this. And it's a horizontal problem in the sense that a Canadian or an American will just as much want used or refurbished tech or baby products or whatever as just as much as the Singaporean or the Australian. And so if we play our cards right, this could be a global company, not necessarily just a regional company. So that's one. Two, I'm a big believer in fintech and embedded fintech especially, and so bringing fintech into any customer journey. And so Rebello's take rate at the time was X, and I felt that we could 2x it by adding fintech layers to it. Um, and so worked with the company on those fintech layers to the point where we've doubled our take rate. So you could effectively have kept your top line GMV the same, but have doubled your revenue just by adding additional product. But at the same time, or more importantly, made that customer a lot more sticky and a lot more engaged than a one-off transaction on the marketplace. And so we backed the company. We'd heard of the company. At the time, it had got its seed investment. We followed it for about a year, and then just around Series A, backed the company with a small check. 6 months later, added a much larger position because we saw a couple of pieces falling into place around their expansion, and we knew that this was going to be a big company, a big outcome eventually. Um, and then helped the company move to the US to become a US company, and that's kind of where we are right now. Um, there'll be more news on Rebello hopefully in the next few months, but we'll leave the story as there for now.
I wonder how did the company actually grow it into different markets? I feel like back in time when I was like evaluating companies coming out of one region, like especially in Asia, trying to go to market into the European/American market. Um, like there's a lot of like culture challenges as well as like, relationship challenges as even my friend's company trying to come from Canada to the US market, they were looking for a lot of partner with direct relationship, like, having the distribution channel for their product. um it was like very very hard to build for entrepreneurs. I wonder how does this person or like this team kind of like having a vision to go abroad from the beginning, since like the company still is like very young.
Yeah, absolutely, great question. two pieces. One's an accident and one's on purpose. So the on purpose piece is um, Philip and Fabienne. So one's from Austria and then one's from France, and both have incredibly global experiences. And both of them coincidentally met in Singapore to build this company. So already we're going global, right? And already this company should not exist. Like there should not be two founders that are from different parts of the world that randomly meet in Singapore, which is very far away from their home or any of their previous experiences, and are building this company that they then take globally. So there by itself is a lot of, for me, a DNA test of what makes founders resilient and their ability to port things. So that's one. They're also building a horizontal category. So going global is not for everybody, by the way. The category needs to be really horizontal, and to the point where the only changes are local supply, local distribution, and local language, but everything else can kind of port over quite nicely. The other thing is Philip and Fabian have an incredibly open mind and and really just want to hire and learn about the best cultural nuances for that specific market, and not necessarily apply or carry what worked well in one place and say, oh, if it works well here, it has to work well there, right? So for us, they were learning in every new market, but being very efficient about how they learned. I think they spent, at the time, like $5 or $6 million to scale to like 4 or 5 markets. So something ridiculous, at the time of investment. And even the U.S., when they started the experiment, it was a pretty low cost experiment, and the U.S. kind of just took off, and changed, in my opinion, the trajectory of the company. The other thing, which is an accident, is they went to Australia first, and I felt like Australia, from a language, from a learning standpoint, was a great test bed to what was going to happen in California, with some tweaks. And had they not done that, had they just been in hardcore Southeast Asia without Australian learning, I think the move to the US would have been slightly harder. And so I think that piece was really an untold hero in, as far as experience is concerned, an unsung hero in the success that will eventually be this company, Libello.
Mm. I wonder how, like, so from, like, observing entrepreneurs in Singapore, which is like a very diverse um place in the world, to, it's like a mixed turn of, like, the culture in from everywhere in the world. I wonder what were some, like, lessons that, if today you're like investing in Silicon Valley based companies, that you could take away as lessons to, implement into your daily investing strategy.
Sorry, so repeat that. If I was investing in Silicon Valley companies,
Yeah. So I guess, like, what are something that you've learned in investing in the Singapore ecosystem or like Asia ecosystem that you would take away to, apply into if you're like investing in Silicon Valley?
yeah, absolutely. So scale is hard, distribution is hard, and going global is very hard. One thing that I learned, that I think is different in the U.S. versus here is, next to us we have Indonesia, we have Malaysia, we have Philippines, Thailand, um, and proximity wise, they're just as close as there are states in the U.S. But realistically, it's just as easy to scale into Indonesia as it would be to scale into Brazil, minus the flight. There's no common denominators as far as language is concerned, as far as currency is concerned, as far as banking is concerned. And so, versus in the U.S., where a lot of the rails are homogeneous, a lot of the languages is essentially fixed. Yeah, you have some cultural nuance, cultural population differences between the states. You might have some political differences between the states, but by and large, scaling should in theory be a lot easier. And so, if I was investing in Silicon Valley companies today, which thankfully we have an amazing team that does that for us. Um, I would probably be thinking very hard about how this company becomes big. You can't really be big without. Yeah, you could have a U.S. Domestic market only and be big, but at some point, to really be big and scaled, you want to be global, and how you do that in an effective way and where you kind of land first, I think is super important. Um, I think for us in Southeast Asia, we've turned into masters of regulation and the regulatory environment for each market and how to navigate each market efficiently, and which ones to scale and which ones to to avoid or do for later. And I think that's where I think we would add a lot of value to any investment in Silicon Valley, maybe in the later stage when they are thinking about where and how they go global.
What's your thought on AI related companies? And I guess like also broad on a broader level, like, there is people investing in um the model, and then there's people bullish on the application, slash, I guess like people call it GPA wrapper to a degree. So like,
Yep.
um, so I wonder like where would you bet your money on in
The
these
model,
two?
the model.
Okay.
So I'll get into that. So our firm is super bullish on AI, and for all the right reasons. It is completely game changing technology. It's going to change the way we live, the way we work, the way we consume data, how that data is used to enrich our lives. And then as it sort of seeps into other parts of the economy, how robotics change, how the labor force changes, etc. I think there's a whole bunch of change that is to come, or a transformational shift that's about to happen, and AI will be at the core and center of that. So that's on the table, and there's no doubt there. Where I do have doubt is or caution is, um, when you are building an AI company, you are competing with other folks who are building AI companies globally and distributed teams. You are also competing with. Sorry, I got thrown off there. You're also competing with folks that are uh, building uh, AI technology within individual corporations. You're competing against Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, etc. And so the ability to completely differentiate is needs to be really high, and that bar needs to be really high. But more importantly, your ability to differentiate and then out distribute all of those folks, um, makes it really challenging and really hard to underwrite, in my opinion. And so my view on AI is, at least at the application layer, it's going to be a race to the bottom as far as pricing is concerned. Distribution is going to win, and it's going to be really hard to build product that out distributes any of those folks. You still have all of the SaaS players that are incorporating AI into their offerings and giving that away for free in many cases. And so, how you win in that environment remains to be seen. And then to add to that, as VCs, we tend to, in my view, overpay for things we're very excited about or super bullish about. And so, how do you curtail all of that risk and underwrite it in valuations that I think are somewhat inflated, remains to be seen.
Mm. I wonder, when it comes to AI, um, or like other trends, what are some trends that you feel like you guys have seen in your team based on where you are compared to the rest of the world?
I mean, we've done a lot of work on AI, and we've also made a bunch of bets. A lot of them have been published or recently published. So we see a lot of AI being pushed and rolled out in digital health, and for good reason. There's a company that we recently backed called Nabla, who's making doctors' lives the providers' lives incredibly easy. And there's a whole host of others that are in pipeline. And so we are doing our bit in terms of making sure we're at the forefront of AI and kind of investing. There's a company that I can speak about now that we didn't do but really wanted to get into in Korea, that does a LLM, SSLLM for Korean enterprises. We'll probably try and get to the next round. But those are the things globally that we are looking at. So it's not to say that we aren't playing and we're at the forefront of that. We also, within our fund structure, have a dedicated pocket that backs very early stage AI projects, which is the first of its kind in Europe to be able to do that. And so it's not to say that we aren't doing our bit. We're just being prudent around our approach and making sure that we're very thoughtful in terms of where and how we invest.
Mm. I guess you mentioned about this deal in Korea. Um, I guess how do you spend your time in the entire Asia or like Southeast Asia region? Like, is there like in each region there's like an associate that's covering the entire region or entire country or like city, or how do you guys kind of like have the coverage in different places?
I
And do
wish
you?
I wish there was an associate in every country.
Mhm.
We're a fairly lean team, and we like to purposely keep it that way. It sort of helps with being tight and making sure that we're able to stay on top of the knowledge that we share. Fairly lean team globally, and Southeast Asia, India, South Korea, Australia are wide geographies for us to cover. But I think the way we think about it is because we invest slightly later stage, so Series B, Series C, um, it allows us to sort of see things in the middle and at the top of the funnel. And so, we're not going through thousands and thousands of companies to come up with an investment thesis. We will see, I don't know, 30 to 50 in every market and track those. And so from that perspective, it becomes a lot easier to stay on top of certain markets and certain market trends. That plus making really good friends with all of the earliest stage guys in most of those markets. So we have a good idea of sort of what's happening in their portfolio, and who's showing resilience and ability to go all the way, is also helpful. Does that necessarily mean we'll get everything? Absolutely not. But I do think, at least in Southeast Asia, we're super happy with the portfolio that we have. And if we look around and say, oh, did we miss this? Did we miss that? Should we have done this? Should we have done that? I think, by and large, with the exception of one or two things, we're really happy with where things stand at the moment.
Mm. In terms of picking deals, what are some like specific benchmark you would use to um pick deals? Because I saw that you guys invest in Chime, you guys invest in um Juliet Has a Gun, which is a perfume company, and then there is just like so many different things, right? Like so in very different sectors, or like Pinduoduo, which is like, like it's all over the place. So I guess like how do you guys like spend the time to dedicate into each sector? And then is there like a universal benchmark that you use to evaluate um the investment?
Yep. So Juliet Has a Gun was invested by our private equity team, so that's why it feels slightly slightly different from anything the venture team would do. It was more hardcore consumer focused. Um, We are divided on the venture team by sectors. So we have four core sectors: fintech, digital health, energy, and consumer. And then, sort of an AI layer that sits across the entire four. That's a little bit more horizontal. Within the consumer realm, we spend a lot of time with our LPs, as we mentioned earlier, but also individually as teams across the globe, thinking about certain themes and certain topics within that sector, and what's going to transcend well, what's going to be hot. In terms of picking deals, we sort of look for scale. We look for large markets. Ideally, the markets should be horizontal in our case, so something that I can kind of take to many markets within a region. And then the most important thing I look for is founder resilience. Look, 2021, 22, 23 really tested the mettle and the capability for all founders. Their ability to react quickly, their ability to cut costs dramatically where important, to stretch runway, the ability to change business models. All of those things highlight resilience, and the ability to continue to overcome multiple bumps and bruises along the way is so important for us. And so just making sure that our founders are incredibly resilient is key.
Mm. I wonder, what are some interesting like companies that coming out of your most like recent profile that you're excited about?
Our most recent what?
A portfolio.
I'm most excited about. I can't tell you one or two. I'm excited about all for a variety of reasons. I'm excited for FinExcel and Credivo because they will end up being the largest fintech in Southeast Asia, and the largest digital bank in Southeast Asia by far. And they've done incredibly well, led by an incredible founder. So that will be quite a good success story. I'm excited for Igloo because that'll be the only regional insurer and insurtech player in Southeast Asia, and I think there's some exciting things ahead for them. Um, I'm excited for Rebello because I think that'll be a really large consumer internet company, and one that can be truly global in nature. Um, AI Rudder for us is our bet on AI and conversational AI, specifically in the fintech and insurtech segments, and they're doing some amazing things. Have had excellent performance, and so on the right track. And then Coherent for us is an amazing story of something that we invested very early on that was based in Hong Kong, but is now scaled globally and is used by every single major insurer on the planet, and in enterprise SaaS. And so, yeah, I mean, I can't pick one that I'm excited about. I'm giving you like four or five. But I will say these four or five are not without trials and tribulations. Like these stories are not linear. Behind, we're excited about XYZ sits a lot of work, and a lot of bumps and bruises, and a lot of time thinking and being thoughtful about how to approach scale in the right way, and in a way that builds really large companies. So I know, venture gets this interesting rep of we come in, we deploy money, and everything's growing like a rocket ship, and it's loss making and all of that. I think that's changing now, and I think both investors and founders need to be a lot more thoughtful about where growth comes from, and also a lot more realistic in terms of what will truly be an outcome. Not every company is going to exit to Microsoft. And not every company is going to get listed and go public. And so, what are truly going to be the outcomes, and how do we drive those as best as possible? And so, I'm excited about all of those, to answer your question, but it's not without a lot of effort and work in the background to get there. Our fatal flaw, and certainly mine, is I spend a lot of time on the operational side of our businesses and the portfolio. So I'm very deep on with a lot of our founders on a lot of their most pressing topics, and very active on the portfolio. And so maybe I live the bumps and bruises a little bit more than others, or a little bit closer than others. So for me, that sort of comes as learning, but also as insight for the next set of investments. That this is not going to necessarily always be smooth sailing, and there are going to sometimes be bumps and bruises along the way. Hopefully, not too many.
I wonder, I saw that, let's talk about like one of your portfolio. You mentioned like there's like AI router. I don't know if I like pronounce it right. So
Yep.
let's say this deal is invested by Sequoia and Tiger Global, among like other top like VC firms. I wonder, how do you position yourself to getting into the deal that's like competitive? And when you're thinking about exit, what are the kind of like returns that you're looking at for each company, as since it's a little bit later stage than the earlier stage, pre-seed or seed, people are looking for each deal to return the whole fund to a degree. And I wonder, what's the thinking framework you're using to um, think about like the exit or liquidation?
Grace, we're really nice people, so people allow us into deals all the time because we're really nice human beings. Um, with AI Rudder, actually, my partner here, Nicholas, had a relationship with the founders from their last company, and had obviously kept in touch as their last company exited. And so, you know, it was a much easier conversation regarding allocation, and that's typically how deals are done. Either we're showing that we can add value in certain markets, certain regions, with certain LPs sometimes, or this is completely relationship based, and, and so that's the story with AI Rudder. Um, with any investment that we make, the idea is to return the fund, even at our stage. A little harder to do with $1 billion fund, versus the last few, but no less that is still the goal, that is still the ambition. I think where we'd be happy, is 3 4 times, uh, 5 times, but I think the goal is to, as best as we can, try and return the fund.
Mm. As you mentioned, like, these founders are some sounds like they're like second time founders. What's your thought on like second time founders? Like, do they outperform like the traditional first time founders, or do you feel like there's no pattern at
I
all?
don't I don't think I don't think there's enough pattern. The only thing I think you're buying there is experience, and uh, you're going to surpass or override some mistakes sooner, that were made earlier on. But it also depends on the type of founder. There's a founder here in Singapore, who we've known for a while. He exited his first company, uh, less than 70, 80 million or so. Um, and he only took one round of capital, so he accumulated most of that money. And now he built his second company, and the second company has a much larger TAM. But I think my view is, if you gave him a second exit at around the same as the first, or maybe slightly more, he would take it, right? And so on paper, yeah, that's a second time founder with a big TAM. You should totally back that. But in reality, the personality may be one where he's solving for 2 or 3 year short term outcomes, than really spending the time to build, between 10 and 12 years to build a long term large company.
Mhm.
Akshay, is a second-time founder. He's at FinExcel. I don't know what happened to his first company, but I don't think it was a large outcome by any stretch. I think he did okay. But on this second company, he's been building this um, for 8 years now, and he's valued at nearly 2 billion. And he may have an exit in the next few years, but he's in no rush because he's like, look, I'm building a large company that I want it to be institutionalized and eventually outlive me and all of that, and that takes time and being thoughtful. So I don't think there's necessarily a formula. I do think it is the person. You have to be very careful in falling into some of those biases.
What's your thought on like India entrepreneurs, in the AI age? What are some companies that you would, or like category of companies that you would put your money in?
Infrastructure. So I love Indian founders. They come from a place where capital is scarce, talent is abundant, and you're competing for everything. And so you have to, by nature of talent being abundant and capital being scarce, it forces you to be very scrappy, to be very entrepreneurial in the truest sense of entrepreneurism, and to be incredibly resilient. There's this saying there's this term in Hindi called jugaad, which means effectively means hustle, or to out hustle. And that's something that Indian entrepreneurs have in ways that many others don't. There will be 1,000 companies, and one company will raise their Series A and Series B and go on, and the rest will sort of flicker and die after the friends and family round. So there's just a lot happening, and so to be able to survive in India requires serious resilience. Um, in terms of AI, I think the application layer for me, as we talked about, is not attractive. The infrastructure layer is. There are companies that we've met where they're building infrastructure at a pace that's much better than any other market we've ever seen. And so we believe that there's a brain drain and reverse brain drain going back to India from Silicon Valley. There's natural born talent in country. We're producing the most engineers in the world by far, and so it's only a matter of time before all of that sort of shows up. Um, and the most important change that's happened in India, in my view, in the last couple of years, is you now have a public market that can attract retail investors for tech companies in a way that you haven't had before, and you don't have in Southeast Asia, and you don't have in the Middle East. And so that is going to play a huge role in providing liquidity to early stage investors as well as employees, but also make sure that the company's on the right track from a governance standpoint to be large and truly game changing.
Hmm. I wonder when you are diligencing the AI model layer or like infrastructure layer, as a non-technical person, which I assume you're non-technical based on your like finance related backgrounds, and I wonder like how do you diligence it effectively?
We have folks around the firm that we bring in who are super technical. So there was one company that we looked at in India in the infra layer that was doing stuff that would essentially outcompete Snowflake and Databricks. But to understand the technical efficacy of that, and sort of how they were getting that competitive edge, we needed to bring in somebody that really understood that space and could really break down their algo in great detail. And so we have friends of the firm that are able to do that, and so we engage them to help and to assist. But yeah, I'm not technical, and so we rely heavily on that those resources for additional firepower.
I wonder, I have a really this is a very detailed question, but I wonder, I guess like sometimes I feel like it's sensitive to do like diligence when involving third party when someone's building something in stealth mode. How do you kind of like combat that? So let's say if a team of founders starts building something truly innovative and their algorithm is kind of like proprietary data, and like how do you kind of navigate that kind of situation?
Great question. We rarely come into that situation because we typically invest after it's out of stealth mode and has started to monetize and it started to distribute. But if I was in that position, look, one of the most important things in our business, outside of reputation, is trust, and just building trust with with the founders, and building trust on doing what you say you're going to do. And so, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't even bring in anybody third party until I felt I had the right level of trust to as long as everything checks out, take this to the finish line and be the one that invests. And so as long as I don't have that trust and conviction with the founder, I wouldn't move further. And same thing for the founder. If they don't trust you, then I wouldn't expect them to open doors to some of their secret code.
Mm, amazing. Okay, so where are the last 1 minute fire round for you? Oh, by the way,
Okay.
some people compliment on our backdrop. Anyway,
Okay. Cool.
uh, so yeah, one of the audience mentioned this, but anyway, okay. So, first question: what's your favorite book?
What's my what?
What's your favorite book?
There are too many. I was asked this before, and
Yeah, your answer was Thinking Fast and Slow.
I think that's the same one for now. But there's too many. There's too many.
Okay.
There's a few back there that need to be read.
Or I guess like what's your content diet look like?
My content diet.
Yeah, what do you consume every day to keep yourself stay competitive in the game?
It's a lot of Twitter. It's a lot of Reddit. Um, Mostly healthy Twitter and healthy Reddit. There's unhealthy parts to both of those. Um, I do read a fair bit, which is why the book question typically is a hard one to answer. But I'd say those are my three major sources of insight, and then there's obviously LinkedIn for the fourth.
What do you read on Reddit, by the way?
A lot of the times it's reviews for some of our companies. So, when we were investing in Rebello, or when we were investing in new companies, typically for the consumer ones at least, there's a ton of reviews and ton of insight that you can get from users who are posting either tutorials on how to use a product, or where the discount codes are or whatever. And so there's a ton of insight that nobody checks on our companies. And so I will typically go to our founders, like you can ask Philip this. I'll say, hey, screenshot, so and so customer says this, tickets unanswered. How do we improve this overall process? And he's like, yeah, I know, we need to check this, check that, blah blah blah, whatever, or we need to hire this person or that person. So that's typically Reddit for me. It's mostly company stuff,
Mm.
or trade stuff as well.
I wonder, like, how would you apply this Reddit strategy if you're investing in an earlier company? Like, if you're
Um,
investing in a pre-seed company, they may
You
not.
wouldn't. You wouldn't.
Okay.
If you for me, Reddit's just another source of traction. In many cases, I want to know, is the customer love real? Is the traction real? And because you could say whatever you want on Trustpilot or Google reviews or whatever, but you could hack all of those things. And so I feel to hack Reddit would be really really tough. And so you get a lot of brutal feedback, good or bad. And the ones that are bad are, as long as you can use them in a constructive way, fantastic. It's only better for the company. But for earlier stage, probably wouldn't work.
Mm. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to my dinner party? These days, it's a lot of cricket on my mind because we're in the middle of cricket season, so it'd probably be members of the Indian cricket team. If I had to do a dinner party today, it would not be business and VC people. I have enough of that in normal dinner parties. So if I had to make it something interesting, it would probably be sports people. I could probably learn a lot more from them about competitive stuff, team building stuff, staying on top of your game. So it'd probably be cricket people. And if my son was at my dinner party, then that would be good for him too.
Mm. Where can we find you outside of work?
Sorry, what's that?
Where can we find you outside of work?
Um, these days, you will find me outside of work at the cricket nets in Dempsey, either practicing or on the cricket field in the Indian Association playing, typically on the weekends. My phone is off for like 6 hours because I'm in a game, and I played Division One for Singapore, so it's very very competitive. Or you will find me on the streets of Singapore in the night, roaming around taking photos. I'm big into photography, specifically street photography, and I do a lot of work for a company called Leica, and so you will typically find me doing that. And those are the easiest places to unwind.
By the way, you have an amazing Instagram page. I stalked a little bit yesterday for
Cool,
our
thank
show.
you, thank you,
Amazing.
appreciate it.
Well, Rajiv, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
I really enjoyed this. Thank you for having me.
Let me